Welcome to the Synthesis of Yoga, the book that changed my life. We are studying Sri Aurobindo's book, The Synthesis of Yoga, and we have reached the 8th chapter of the part 1, the Yoga of Divine Works. And this chapter is called The Supreme Will. And we are reading line by line. There is a description below, and in that you will find the link to this chapter. The very purpose of this reading is to tune into Sri Aurobindo's light and force and imbibe it. So we are reading line by line, getting into his rhythm and flow, so that that consciousness that he has embodied finds its imprint in us, reformats our brain, mind, and opens our vision. It's a sadhana in itself, the very practice of reading. In our last episode, that was 105, we read about Purusha and Prakriti. It is in the context of the enquiry into who is this Supreme Master and his will, divine will. How do we know the action of the divine and the will of the divine? In that journey, we saw that our sense of I, the ego-bound I, is only a surface formation. And in order to step out of it, we are to realize the separation between Purusha and Prakriti. That was like the first stage. Purusha is like the witnessing part, and the Prakriti is the movie that is happening, the audience and the movie. So that when we are involved in the movie, we are identified with the movie, we get lost in it. But then you wake up and you realize you are just watching a movie, you can stand back, watch. That is the Purusha-Prakriti separation. And then he also has given a deeper insight. Behind the Purusha-Prakriti is Iswara-shakti. The difference between the two is that Purusha-Prakriti act as separate powers, whereas Iswara-shakti is really like the film director and whose executive power manifesting the entire film. That's the position of creative power. Whereas the Purusha-Prakriti, Purusha is only a witness, a liberated, free witness who realized that this was only a movie. Whereas Iswara-shakti is the position where you are seeing you are the creator, and creation, the creative process of the Ishvara is through his own Shakti, and they are inseparable powers. So that's what we have learned in the last episode. Now we move on to the current episode. We are exploring 106. We are starting with paragraph number 13. If this is the truth of works, and if this is the truth of works, the first thing the sadhaka has to do is to recoil from the egoistic forms of activity and get rid of the sense of an I that acts. So this is our central knot, the ego, I, ego sense, an action born out of that sense of the ego. I am the doer. I am responsible for the action and its consequence. I am the center of that whole movement. We don't see that it is the nature force, the Prakriti, that is acting. So the very first thing in the Karma Yoga, Yoga of Divine Works, is to step out of this egoistic forms of activity, I-centric activity, If this is the truth of works, the first thing the sadhaka has to do is to recoil from the egoistic forms of activity and get rid of the sense of an I that acts. It is not that the action is stopped. It is this sense, the sense of I, that is quietly erased, so that you begin to see the nature force working. The movie is happening. You are not the one who is the movie. You are just witnessing the movie of nature force doing all things, creating scenes, characters, drama, the entire spectrum of life and its complex activities. That's nature force in action. And you have quietly stepped back to witness it. So the I am the doer is quietly beginning to get erased. So if this is the truth of works, the first thing the sadhaka has to do is to recoil from the egoistic forms of activity and get rid of the sense of an I that acts. Otherwise, you are identified with some character in the movie and believe that I am the one who is acting. He has to see and feel that everything happens in him. He has to see and feel, seeing and feeling that everything happens in him by the plastic conscious or subconscious or sometimes superconscious automatism. Plastic, something that is very, very flexible, and this can be conscious or subconscious or sometimes superconscious. 3 different degrees. One is conscious, our wakeful conscious state. Below there is something subconscious, and above there is something superconscious. Both are inaccessible. Though this whole events that are unfolding, they are very plastic, and we become, so he has to see and feel that everything happens in him by the plastic conscious or subconscious or sometimes superconscious automatism. That's an important point here, because we are starting our journey by observing the nature force, the Prakriti's workings, and that looks like an automatism, an automatic working of his mental and bodily instruments, moved by the forces of spiritual, mental, vital, and physical nature. So the layers of nature, there is a physical nature, material, physical nature. Our body and its nerve currents and all that is very physical, and behind or within that is the energy that is animating, the prana-shakti, the vital that is animating, and behind that there is the mind and its narratives and stories, the cognitive system that is intelligence and the cognition that is guiding the energy and the physical activity, and behind all that the spiritual domain, which most of the people do not have access to. So all these actions are unfolding, and this is happening, just happening. When we are waking up, we are beginning to see physical activities happening, vital activities happening, then mental activities, and beyond that something spiritual is also happening. So he has to see and feel that everything happens in him by the plastic conscious or subconscious or sometimes superconscious automatism of his mental and bodily instruments. So these are instrumental layers through which you are seeing. This is happening through the instrumentation, mental and bodily instruments moved by the forces And 4 types of forces are indicated here: spiritual, mental, vital, and physical nature. Spiritual, mental, vital, and physical nature. So generally, when we refer to force in modern science, it is only dealing with physical forces. When it comes to the vital force, it is still in a very early stage of discovery by modern science. Mental force, the power of the idea, thought, cognition, this is not measurable. While it is possible to measure the brain waves, the brain's electrical and thermal activities, all that can be measured, but the power of thought and an idea cannot be measured in such an objective way. But there is an immense power of world of ideas. So is emotions. All that has immense power, even if we cannot measure. So there are forces, not just physical forces. There are vital forces, mental forces, and behind and beyond mind, the spiritual force. All that are acting through the mental and bodily instrumentation. All this is the collection of the streaming that is happening. We are like a junction where all these streams are flowing through. We can become aware of them. He has to see and feel that everything happens in him. It's not something that is happening outside. You look inside and you see everything happening in you, happens in him by the plastic conscious or subconscious or sometimes superconscious automatism of his mental and bodily instruments, and moved by the forces of spiritual, mental, vital, and physical nature. There is a personality on his surface. So what we identify as I, me, it is a tiny thin layer of our surface being. There is a personality on his surface that chooses and wills, submits and struggles, tries to make good in nature and prevails over nature. But this personality is itself a construction of nature, and so dominated, driven, determined by her that it cannot be free. That's our outer life, the surface personality who is experiencing that I am choosing, I am willing, I am submitting to nature, or I'm struggling against nature. And not only that, sometimes tries to make good in nature or prevails over nature. You're trying to control nature, whether it is inner nature or outer nature. Trying to control our anger, control our fear, control our laziness, use our intelligence, intelligent will, buddhi, or express our emotions, dance with our emotions. All that, trying to master, or struggling with these flux of forces. This is the surface being that we are, struggling and trying to master our thoughts, our emotions, our sensations, our energy, and bodily movements, all that. But this personality is itself a construction of nature, nature force, Prakriti, her workings. It is her construction out of the cosmic matter, out of the cosmic energy, out of the cosmic mind. There is a small lump that is formed, a small centralization around a tiny little ego. A tiny little individual has been formed. That is a construction by nature, and so dominated, driven, determined by her that it cannot be free. This surface personality can never be free because it is fundamentally a construct by the nature. It is a formation or expression of the self in her. So this surface personality is actually a formation or an expression expression of the self in her. Self here is a capital S. So nature knows, the Prakriti knows there is a self hidden within her. And all her labor is to sculpt him, shape him, give a form to the involved self. Self-expression. When we speak about self-expression, it is not just we individuals attempting self-expression. Nature is expressing herself so that she can reveal through her modes of material, vital, mental constructions the self who is involved in her. And we individually experience this attempt of the nature to express herself. It is a formation or expression of the self in her. It is a self of nature rather than a self of self. So here is play of capital and small letters. It is a self of nature. Here it is a small self, the ego-bound, tiny, little construct. That is self of nature, capital and nature. The larger universal nature is creating a tiny ego self. Rather than a self of self, the supreme self. It is not that supreme self that is being manifested here as self, but the self in nature, and the tiny little ego self has been formed. His natural and processive, his natural and processive, not his spiritual and permanent being. So there is this processive being, not spiritual and permanent being, a being who is part of the process. Like out of the ocean, waves are arising. There is a process of wave that is arising and rolling out and rolling back to the ocean, dissolving back to the ocean. In that process, there is a temporary construction of a wave. That wave self, that is the ego construct, not the original permanent being who is behind all things. That's not the spiritual and permanent being. A temporary constructed personality, not the true immortal person. So the true self is immortal, deathless, beyond birth, beyond decay, indestructible. It's not that self, but a temporary construction made by nature in her attempt to express that which is involved in her. There is an evolutionary process unfolding in nature. Sri Aurobindo has made that statement, all life is yoga, and yoga of nature, subconsciously laboring to birth that which is involved in her. So the great permanent, eternal, deathless self is involved in her, and she is laboring to birth and give form. In that journey, there is a small ego self that is getting constructed by nature. It is a formation or expression of the self in her. It is a self of nature rather than a self of self. His natural and processive, not his spiritual and permanent being. A temporary constructed personality, not the true immortal person. Immortal person. Our ego construct is a mortal person, whereas our true self, the eternal, timeless self, is immortal, deathless. It is that person that he must become. So, out of our temporary constructed mortal personality and that tiny self, unpacking, stepping out, we must become that immortal person. Person here with capital P. It is that person that he must become. The seeker of integral yoga, we are seeking to become that immortal person. He must succeed in being inwardly quiescent. That's the very first condition. Succeed in being inwardly quiescent. If we look at our inner space, our inner weather is shifting all the time. Sometimes it's clear blue sky with sun shining, birds singing, happy inner space. Then there are times where it is cloudy, sometimes suffocating, noisy, with a lot of rain, thunder, lightning, moody, gloomy, gray skies. So there is a full spectrum of inner weather change that is constantly happening, continuously changing our inner space. Just like outer nature has her immense variety of moods and changes, so does it happen our inner space. There's a continuity of flux, movement, change, and once in a while some peaceful quietude. What we need to cultivate is that quiet inner space, like you have climbed up a mountain, and in that peak you're looking into a deep, vast valley. You can see the mountain ranges. There is such an utter quietude and a profound vastness. That's the kind of space we need to cultivate within us. He must succeed in being inwardly quiescent. Detach himself as the observer from the outer active personality. Our outer being is the active part, a construct of the nature, Prakriti. We have to detach from that outer personality and become the observer. Detach himself as the observer from the outer active personality who is actually involved in this movie of life. So the movie of life is going on with so many other characters. We are there. So our identification with our character is what we are breaking and detaching. Detach himself as the observer from the outer active personality and learn the play of the cosmic forces in him. Cosmic forces. Though we are individuals, what is flowing through us, the physical forces, vital forces, mental forces, spiritual forces, these are cosmic in nature. Individual is only a tiny little centralized concentrated point where consciousness is waking up and looking at itself. So, and learn the play of the cosmic forces in him. So in this individual who has woken up, who is like a tiny little stage, tiny little theater, where the Purusha, the witness, is waking up, detaching, standing back and watching the play of the cosmic forces. So you begin to understand how they are playing out. Learn the play of the cosmic forces in him by standing back from all blinding absorption. Blinding. You become blind to the fact that you are actually a witness. And beyond the witness, you are the Iswara, the original immortal self. All that are forgotten, and you have entered into this blinding absorption. And filmmakers knows how to grab attention and bind your attention into the plots of the play. Twists and turns and surprises and climaxes and thrills, so that you're entirely absorbed in the play of life. Standing back from all blinding absorption in its turns and movements. because life has its twists and turns and plots where we get entangled, absorbed, lost, as if lost in a maze and absorbed in the inquiries that we are into. Even the spiritual awakening and that journey, that quest itself, has all these elements in it. And at one point, we wake up and to see who is the one who is on this quest of journey. There is an outer personality, and you discover something that is standing back. So he must succeed in being inwardly quiescent, detach himself as the observer from the outer active personality, and learn the play of the cosmic forces in him. By standing back from the all-blinding absorption in its turns and movements. So this is the first step. Detach, stand back, become the witness of the movie of life. Thus, calm, detached, a student of himself and a witness of his nature. A student of himself and a witness of his nature. Because each individual mold has its own individual construction and its nature. And you are becoming a student of this streaming of mental forces, vital forces, physical forces, and something mysterious, the spiritual, that is drawing all this. So you're standing back and beginning to see as a student, learning from within. Because your subjective space is your laboratory for experimentation, for observation, for data collection, but not an objective data, but a subjective currents, streams, subjective objects of thoughts, imaginations, sensations, emotions. So thus calm, detached, a student of himself and a witness of his nature, he realizes that he is the individual soul. He is the individual soul who observes the works of nature. So nature constructed your outer personality, ego-bound outer personality. In that construct, you woke up. And you are realizing that I am an individual soul who is observing the works of nature. Here, nature is not just the outer nature, inner nature, the mental streams, the vital streams, the physical. The entire storytelling that is going on inside one's head, the emotions that are rising and falling in the heart, the drives, impulses, compulsions, all that. You're just watching like a student who just woke up, and you are the laboratory who observes the works of nature, accept tranquilly her results. So her nature's processes and activities, there are results to it. And as a detached witness, tranquilly, without reactions, you can receive peacefully the results. And sanctions or withholds his sanction from the impulse of her acts. So nature's acts enters into us, flows through us like impulsions, compulsive streams. And you can not only observe them, accept them, you can also sanction them. Allow an impulse to flow through and manifest through your thought, speech, and impulsion action. Or you can withhold the sanction. I do not want this urge to explode into anger to flow through me. I don't want this craving to grab this or that food to flow through me. You can stop that impulsion, that compulsion, that drive. That's where the beginning of mastery is. You're withholding the sanction. The Purusha is recognizing I am an individual soul who has woken up in nature and looking at the workings of nature and see, okay, this wave of inspiration is worthy of riding. I give sanction to myself to go with that wave, and I'm riding on that wave. Then comes another wave of fear, doubt, confusion. We say, no, I do not want to ride on this wave of fear, doubt, or confusion. So that's why you begin to accept or reject, sanction or withhold sanction. This is the most important power of the Purusha. You're going beyond being just a witness. You are recognizing that I can give sanction or withhold sanction. These are the possibilities. So, thus, calm, detached, a student of himself and a witness of his nature, he realizes that he is the individual soul who observes the works of nature, accepts tranquilly her results, and sanctions or withhold his sanction from the impulse to her acts. Impulse to her acts. There is this movement of continuous impulsive activities that are happening, and you are able to see through them all and choose which wave to ride. Still, the action is done by nature force. All that you're doing is witnessing, accepting, or withholding the sanction. Depending upon whether you're accepted or withheld, the force will flow through. You're like a valve that accepts flow or stops the flow. It's a choice Purusha has. It's an act of will in the awakened individual soul. At present, this soul or Purusha is little more than an acquiescent spectator. That is the first stage. A spectator. You are just watching the movie of life as a spectator. At present, the soul or Purusha is little more than an acquiescent spectator, influencing perhaps the action and development of the being by the pressure of its veiled consciousness, but for the most part delegating its powers or a fragment of them to the outer personality. So this awakened witness soul, individual soul who wakes up within the construction of nature, who is putting some pressure, is having some influence, but mostly delegating to the outer personality, the ego self, to go ahead and do things. So at present, this soul or Purusha is little more than an acquiescent spectator, influencing perhaps, because the degree to which you can control is very, very limited in that early stage of awakening. Influencing perhaps the action and development of the being. The action and development of the being. The being, there is a physical being, vital being, mental being, and then beyond all that, this pure being is waking up. The individual soul is waking up, and there's a development of the mind, development of the vital, development of the physical, and development of this emerging soul. And there is a little bit of influence that is possible in that space by the pressure of its veiled consciousness. So the consciousness of this awakened individual soul is still veiled by the pressure of its veiled consciousness, but for the most part delegating its powers or a fragment of them to the outer personality. That is what it does. It delegates most of its powers or fragment of them to outer personality, the ego construct, that is the nature's outer personality. In fact, to nature. So it's when we give it to our outer personality, we are actually giving it to nature. For this outer self is not Lord, but subject to her, Anisha, the one who is not the Lord, subject to nature's workings. So for this outer self is not Lord, but subject to her, Anisha. But once unveiled, it can make its sanction or refusal effective. That's a condition. Once unveiled, it is veiled by the mental streams, emotional streams, energetic streams. Or behind all that is the Purusha that is slowly waking up. Once this awakening Purusha, the individual self, is unveiled, it can make its sanction or refusal effective. Initial attempt to self-regulate is often mostly clumsy, impossible. In spite of knowing, you find yourself being dragged and carried by the streams of nature. And this is one of the early struggles that we discover. The gap between self-awareness and self-mastery. Self-awareness is this awakened soul is waking up and knowing that this is not the direction I want to go. That is the direction I want to go. But you see that the old habits of nature, mental nature, vital nature, physical nature, they will not allow you to go into the new direction. They will go in the old direction they were used to. You're bound by habits and nature's compulsions. So there is the period where the witness is standing back helplessly, trying to control. In spite of knowing that I should not be going in this direction, you find yourself going. In spite of knowing that you should be going in that direction, you are not able to go in other direction. So this is a period where you are slowly building the muscle of sanctioning, withholding the sanction. That power has to be exercised and built. Once unveiled, it can make its sanction or refusal effective. Become the master of the action. Becoming the master of the action. Dictate sovereignly a change of nature. So, habit change, lifestyle change, everyday routine change requires this capacity of really standing back, looking at, accepting or withholding sanction to certain kind of behavior movements and initiating, sanctioning new type of directions. This is the beginning of self-mastery. The Sakshi beginning to become the sanctioner. The witness, the observer beginning to take the role of the sanctioner and supporting that movement. At present, this soul or Purusha is little more than an acquiescent spectator, influencing perhaps the action and development of the being by the pressure of its veiled consciousness, but for the most part delegating its powers or a fragment of them to the outer personality, in fact to nature. For this outer self is not Lord, but subject to her, Anisha. But once unveiled, it can make its sanction or refusal effective. Become the master of the action. Dictate sovereignly a change of nature. Dictating the course of nature itself. Individual nature first, because self-mastery starts with that, mastering one's own nature. Even if for a long time, as the result of fixed association and past storage of energy, the habitual movement takes place independent of Purusha's assent. And even if sanctioned movement is persistently refused by nature for want of past habit, still he will discover that in the end his assent or refusal prevails. Slowly, with much resistance, or quickly with a rapid accommodation of her means and tendencies, she modifies herself and works and her workings in the direction indicated by his inner sight or volition. Direction indicated by his inner sight or volition. That is the role the Purusha brings in, the awakened individual soul brings in. The sight, the inner vision. This is the direction to go. And having that choice, once you have that clarity and choice as a conscious soul, initially the nature may or may not obey. She may continue with the old momentum, old habits, refuse the new direction, but eventually nature will yield, accommodate, and change. And that's the slow molding process by the sheer presence and the pressure of the will of the Purusha who has awakened within nature. This power is to be built like a muscle power, slowly and steadily. But it takes time to do this. Even if for a long time the result of a fixed association and past storage of energy, fixed association and past storage of energy, we see that our bodily activities are a bundle of automation for a particular stimulus. This is how the body and mind and heart would respond. And there is a fixed association and a habitual response. It will continue. There's a past storage of energy that is running the show. The habitual movements takes place independent of Purusha's assent. So Purusha may not have accepted. Purusha has said, no, this should not happen, but in spite of that, it happens. And even if the sanctioned movement is persistently refused by nature, that's another thing nature can do. You are trying to establish a new habit, and it works for a few days, but then the old nature, old habits refuses and they go back like a dog's tail. Independent of Purusha's assent, and even if the sanctioned movement is persistently refused by nature for want of past habit, because a new movement, nature cannot continue because there is no past habit. Nature is bundle of habits. When something is newly introduced, she yields, but she goes back because there is no established muscle memory in the physical system. Automation doesn't happen easily. It requires repetition, so that slowly the groove is formed, the habit is formed. Persistently refused by nature for want of past habit. Still, he will discover that in the end, his assent or refusal prevails. That's where you need tremendous patience to wait and persist with the vision that you have. Slowly, with much resistance, or quickly with a rapid accommodation. So nature can shift. And this shift can be slow or rapid, just like boiling milk. It looks like nothing is happening for a long time. Suddenly, there is a phase change. Many things in nature, in our habit shift, is like that. Initially, it would look like nothing much is happening. You're persisting. Suddenly, at one point, the old resistance loosens up. You are into a new space, a new flow. Nature accommodates what you have intended. Quickly, with a rapid accommodation of her means and tendencies. Nature's means and tendencies. Nature has means, the mental means, vital means, physical means. These are all instrumental layers of the nature. All of them come together, and all their tendencies accommodate what you have intended. She modifies herself and her workings in the direction indicated by his inner sight or volition. So the Purusha's vision and will ultimately prevails nature's habits. And this capacity is something to be cultivated systematically, little by little, and this won't come overnight. You need great deal of patience to work through this. Thus he learns in place of mental control or egoistic will. These are the two ways we attempt change. Mental will, buddhi, and egoistic will. Our I, me and myself. I am the one who is doing this. I am the one who is trying to change the habit. That's ego attempting in its limited personality, outer personality attempting the work. Ego will or mental control. Thus, he learns in place of mental control or egoistic will, an inner spiritual control. An inner spiritual control, which makes him master of nature forces that work in him. So there is an inner spiritual control that is beginning to enter the scene, which is different from the mental control, different from the ego will. An inner spiritual control which makes him master of nature forces. Nature forces, mental force, vital force, physical force. Master of nature forces that work in him and not their unconscious instrument or mechanic slave. When we are unconscious, we are actually slaves of nature's streams. We go with the currents of nature. We do not have the ability to stand back, observe, and choose. When you wake up, this possibility become real. So thus, he learns in place of mental control or egoistic will, an inner spiritual control, which makes him master of the nature forces that work in him and not their unconscious instrument or mechanic slave. So you stop being the zombie, the machine, the automation, the mechanical slave of nature. Above and around him is the Shakti. Above and around him is the Shakti. Shakti, as we have learnt in our previous episode, Shakti is Prakriti ensouled with Purusha. So Purusha is surrounded by Shakti, and above him also is Shakti. Above and around him is the Shakti, the conscious force. Nature force is Prakriti, conscious force is Shakti, the greater conscious divine will and its energy and force involved in the creative process. So above and around him is the Shakti, the universal mother. And from her, he can get all his inmost soul needs and wills. It is from the Shakti, the universal mother, it is from her he can get all his inmost soul needs and wills. Soul needs. There is a mental needs, vital needs, physical needs. Deep within there is a soul needs. Soul has its yearning. Soul turns to the divine mother, the Shakti. So from her he can get all his inmost soul needs and wills, the force that moves things. If only he has a true knowledge of her ways and a true surrender to the divine will in her. So to get the soul's yearning flow out into the life that you have, you must know the ways of the divine mother, the Shakti, and a true surrender to the divine will in her. There is a divine will in the Shakti. That has to be discovered. The mother has a divine will that is driving everything, and the soul has to learn to recognize that will and surrender to her action. Above and around him is the Shakti, the Purusha, who is having Shakti above and around. Above him, above and around him is the Shakti, the universal mother. And from her, he can get all his inmost soul needs and wills, if only he has a true knowledge of her ways and a true surrender to the divine will in her. So that is where our individual soul is attuning to the Divine Mother and her will. Finally, he becomes aware of that highest dynamic self within him. So as the outer personality is left behind, you detach and turn inward to find the will of the Divine Mother within him and surrender to that will. That's when finally he becomes aware of that highest dynamic self within. It is not a passive self, it is dynamic self which is moving all things, directing all things, creating all things. Highest dynamic self within him. Self here is with a capital S. Dynamic self within him and within nature. So what you will be discovering is not the self just within you, but in nature as well. He becomes aware of the highest dynamic self within him and within nature, which is the source of all his seeing and knowing. This dynamic self is the source of all his seeing and knowing. So this is the first major faculty, seeing and knowing. Then the source of the sanction, that's where the will come into picture. The source of sanction, the source of acceptance, the source of rejection. So there is something deep within you which is giving sanction, acceptance, or rejection. It is that which sees, knows, and it has its will. And it is inside you, it is there in nature. This is that dynamic aspect of the self to be discovered. Finally, he becomes aware of that highest dynamic self within him and within nature, which is the source of all his seeing and knowing, the source of the sanction, the source of the acceptance, the source of the rejection. So this is our options. Can you see, know, accept, sanction, reject? That's the inner poise to which one can arrive at. This is the Lord, the Supreme, the One in All, Iswara-shakti. This is the Lord, the Supreme, the One in All, Iswara-shakti, of whom his soul is a portion, a being of that being, and a power of that power. This is the most beautiful identification one can arrive at. Instead of being identified with the drama and the story of surface personality, we detach, become the witness, turn inward, and discover the dynamic self who sees, knows, sanctions, accepts, rejects. This is the Lord, the Supreme, the One in All, Iswara-shakti. There is no separation. Ishwara and Shakti are brought together here. I mean, they are one and the same, two sides of one being. Iswara-shakti is with a hyphen connecting the two. Of whom his soul is a portion. This individual soul is a portion of that universal and transcendent self. A being of that being, a power of that power. So this is the discovery we need to make. The rest of our progress depends on our knowledge of the ways in which the Lord of works manifests His will in the world and in us, and executes them through the transcendent and universal Shakti. So there is the work of this universal Supreme Being. The rest of our progress depends on our knowledge of the ways in which the Lord of works manifests His will in the world and in us. So the Lord of works, all the works that is happening in the world, through all creatures, this greater self is presiding over everything, and it has a work to do in the world and in you. It depends upon that greater will that will decide what you as an instrument is capable and meant to do. So the Lord of works manifests His will in the world and in us and executes them through the transcendent and universal Shakti. So the execution of that self and its vision and its will is through transcendent and universal Shakti, through whom the Supreme acts, and you become a willing servitor of that divine consciousness freely flowing through you. So our ability to receive and transmit, and to see that this is only, your body is only a small tiny center of reception and transmission, and what will be received and transmitted will be dictated by the Supreme Will, not you, not your surface personality. It is that greater will that would choose and see that your soul is ready, open. Therefore, it will flow through you. And that's the most beautiful experience one can arrive at in this journey. Now we are into paragraph 14. The Lord sees in His omniscience the thing that has to be done. The Lord sees in His omniscience the thing that has to be done. Our individual perception is limited to a tiny length of time and a tiny area of space, whereas the Lord of works sees in His omniscience. It's everywhere at the same time. There is a knowing of the whole with every little detail. There's an omniscience of the Lord of works. The Lord sees in His omniscience the thing that has to be done. From that perspective, in the context of the cosmic whole, it sees in this tiny little part what is the thing to be done. This seeing is His will. This seeing is His will. It is a vision that forms by its will. It's God's vision, the eye that shapes. This seeing is His will. It is a form of creative power. The divine vision shapes, and it's a creative power, the very vision. So one challenge we see, very interesting correspondence we see, is when we want to manifest something, we want to create something, first we need to get a clear picture of what we want to manifest, a clear inner vision. It is something very similar. Omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, divine will sees in its eternal vision. And that seeing is an act of will, and it's a creative power. So this seeing is His will. It is a form of creative power. And that which He sees, the all-conscious mother, all-conscious mother, so the creative force of the Ishwara, the Shakti, the mother, all-conscious mother, one with Him, takes into her dynamic self and embodies, and executive nature force carries it out as the mechanism of their omnipotent omniscience. So we have this omnipotency and omniscience of the Iswara-shakti, and the vision seen from her, like the film director seeing the whole vision, and the executive force, power of the director setting things in motion. And then the Prakriti is the mechanism through which it will be transmitted and manifested and materialized. The mental Prakriti, vital Prakriti, physical Prakriti. So there is a transmission from that greater self all the way down to the very mechanics of nature. So the vision seen by the Lord is carried forward by her dynamism, by the Shakti, and transmitted into the Prakriti, and Prakriti through her mechanism manifests. So the Lord sees in His omniscience the thing that has to be done. The seeing is His will. It is a form of creative power. And that which He sees, an all-conscious mother sees, the all-conscious mother, one with Him, takes into her dynamic self and embodies. So all-conscious mother, one with Him, they are inseparable, takes into her dynamic self and embodies an executive nature force. Nature force is an executive agency. Executive nature force carries it out as the mechanism of their omnipotent omniscience. The mechanism of omnipotent omniscience. So the Lord and Shakti has the omnipotent omniscience. From there it flows out through this mechanism of nature. Thus the creative process quietly unfolds through us. But this vision of what is to be, and therefore of what is to be done, arises out of the very being, pours directly out of the consciousness and delight of existence of the Lord, spontaneously like light from the sun. So Satchidananda, Sat Chit Ananda, blissfully conscious existence, is radiating like sun radiating its light. It arises from the Supreme Self, which is transcendent and universal at the same time, and acting through the individual and expressing itself through the nature force, through the mechanisms of the Prakriti. And it starts with this vision of what is to be, and therefore what is to be done. What is to be, what is to be done, arises out of the very being. Being pours directly out of the consciousness and delight of existence of the Lord. Consciousness, Chit, delight, Ananda of the Lord. So here we see the triple movement: being, that is Sat; consciousness, that is Chit; delight, that is Ananda. Sat, Chit, Ananda, that is implied here in this line, arises out of the very being. Sat pours directly out of the consciousness and delight, Chit and Ananda, of existence of the Lord. Existence of the Lord, spontaneously like light from the sun. It's a radiance that is flowing out, arising out of the pure being, consciousness and delight. Delight is the source from where this Sat, Chit and Ananda are inseparable. Out of that is the radiance manifesting, creating the worlds. It is not our mortal attempt to see, our difficult arrival at truth of action and motive, or just demand of nature. So this action of the Supreme Lord is very, very different. It is not our mortal attempt to see, our difficult arrival at truth of action and motive, or just demand of nature. So we struggle to get a clear picture of the future, the direction we want to go. Difficult for us to arrive at the truth of action and motive, even to know what is motivating me in my action. Is it nature's demand and compulsion, or is it a conscious choice? We humans operating from our limited consciousness, struggles with it. That is not how the Lord acts. When the individual soul is entirely at one in its being and knowledge with the Lord and directly in touch with the original Shakti, the transcendent Mother, the Supreme Will can then arise in us too, in the high divine manner as a thing that must be and is achieved by the spontaneous action of nature. So that is how the Supreme Will acts. When the individual soul who has awakened, turned inward, discovered the pathways of the divine Shakti and surrendered to her, she will lift you up, and slowly you identify and become one with the Lord of existence, and whose Shakti then can freely flow through this instrumentation. And once the vision of the Lord enters and that sanction is given, the Shakti takes it up and moves it and flows out, and that transcendent Mother, Supreme Will, then arise in us. We are the instrumental condition of their working in the world. Supreme Will can then arise in us too in a high divine manner as a thing that must be, because it's the will of that greater force that is entering and is achieved by a spontaneous action of nature. Nature obeys because it is the love and delight of the Master of existence, the Lord of existence, pouring into the molds of nature. So nature force spontaneously yields, opens up and obeys. So there is a spontaneous action of nature. There is a smooth, delightful transmission. There is then no desire, no responsibility, no reaction. There is then no desire, no responsibility, no reaction. 3 conditions. Desire. Our normal action is driven by desire. And Gita continuously speaks about nishkama karma, action without desire. No responsibility. Ego is the one that who thinks, I am responsible because I am the one who is doer. That is a delusion. There is no responsibility. It is the greater Supreme Will who is responsible. You are only nimitta matrena, an instrumental condition. No responsibility, no reaction. Nothing in you is reacting. Sthita prajna, immobile, calm, wide, no reaction. It takes place in the peace, calm, light power of the supporting and enveloping and inhabiting divine. This is the fundamental difference by which we recognize the Supreme Will. When the Supreme Will acts through us, there is a continuous growth of peace, calmness, stillness, wideness, clarity, joy, freedom, love, a spontaneous radiance which you are not constructing. You are just a receptive, vast, open field through which the greater vision enters, blazes through, the Shakti pours in and flows through, expresses, and the nature obeys. So there is no desire, no responsibility, no reaction. All takes place in the peace, calm, light, power. Peace, calm, light, power of the supporting and enveloping and inhabiting divine. Supporting, enveloping, inhabiting. Isha vasyam idam sarvam. The Lord inhabits all these molds of life, including your little mold. Lord is inhabiting. It is supporting, it is enveloping. You exist in the divine, and the vaster will flows through you. And with that greater identification deepens the peace, calm, light, power. And it's not your power. You're absolutely free and you're not responsible. There is no reaction in you. There is no desire in you. There is a growing freedom. complete surrender, and the erasing of the surface personality and opening to a vaster influx and flow of the force of the Shakti. So that's how we recognize the divine will. Growing peace, calm, light, power. And within you, no desire, no responsibility, no reaction. These are the conditions that would grow as you grow in identification with the divine will in the world. The supreme will. That's the whole chapter. It's about supreme will. How do we recognize? Our surface personality is bound by the modes of nature, tamas, rajas, and sattva, and the bondage of ego and their reactions, continuous reactions, likes, dislikes, dualities. From all that, the drama, you step back, witness, and turn inward, and open to the Divine Mother, her will. So soul needs are all taken up by the divine will, Mother's will, and flows through. And she liberates you, lifts you up towards the identification with the Master. She and the Master are one and the same. Therefore, the visions of the Master enters, reveals, clears like a radiance of the sun. Sat Chit Ananda, beginning to flow through. And the instrument become a clear channel through which the light and force can flow through. That's the greatest joy of karma yoga, opening to the supreme will. So with that, we come to the end of this episode. Thank you for being with me in this journey. Looking forward to hear your feedback, suggestions. See you next week.